Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to do an album review today, which is where we check out an entire album track by track, exploring each one in a vacuum, seeing what it's doing by itself, and also exploring its part of the larger artwork. Today we're going to be looking at an album from the band Nightmarer. The album is Deformity Adrift, and this does come off of a 2023 album. Do I have a date for this? May. So, middle of this year. But I still think it is the only, someone can correct me if I'm wrong on this, I think it's the only album we've ever done for album review that was released in the year. There's a chance that this album, if I enjoy it, could end up on the album of the year list. Being that it's not on my radar at all, though, I'm probably going to say that if I've heard snippets of it, I didn't really enjoy it enough to check it out on my own. But it also, I don't think I've heard the band Nightmarer before, so it's possible that I just haven't had this album brought to my attention yet. Regardless, let's dive into it. We do have 9 songs ahead of us with only 32 minutes worth of music. I think this is going to be a bit on the shorter side, probably looking at a 2 to 2.5 hour video. I don't know why I make this estimation at the beginning of every one of these, because y'all can already see how long it is. Just by looking at the length of the video, you can gauge if this is worth your time or not. Alright, let's dive into this, checking out our first track, Brutalist, Imperator. It's a very... I was going to say that was a very narrow guitar sound, but they fattened it up real quick. I feel like I should hold off on doing these until a little later in the day, just on the off chance I might be a little more awake. Regardless, I'm awake now. So a really nice 3 pulse here. They're playing around with accents though, and space as well. Shifted off to a 4. Cymbals are still giving us our 4. So we're in 4/4 with a 5 pulse, a 5 bar phrase. Yeah. It's a bizarre push and pull, but it works. Do we roll it over? Yeah. These are short tracks anyways. Oh, what? There's a very clever balance in here. Those polyrhythms. I want to take another shot at that last section. I doubt he's going to bring it back with just 40 seconds to go, but... Oh, yes! That is better than a shot of espresso. Funny story. For like most of my 20s, I thought it was espresso because it gave you energy to do things expressly. It wasn't until I was like 26 or something that someone was like, "You put an X in there?" I'm like, "Yeah, why wouldn't you?" Like it's espresso with just an S. Hmm. Well, back to this. Yeah, this is a lot. I'd like to create a new genre of music if that's fine. I'd like to call this IDM. I know some of you are probably like, wait a second, Bryan, that already exists, and this is not dance music. Yeah, I know. But while I was listening to this, I was like, yeah, this is kind of like intelligent death metal. IDM. Oh, that's taken. It's very proggy, though. But it's not proggy in a way that feels hypernoodly and virtuosic like tech death tends to be, and I don't really feel it does things proggy enough to call it progressive metal. I think by definition, this is probably where I would put this as progressive death metal. But I don't know, it just feels weird labeling this as prog. It doesn't have that air of experimentation to it, I think is really, really where my dividing line for it is. It's just really technical in a way that makes it feel very intentional and well thought out. And that's sort of where I went with the intelligent line. I think intelligent's kind of a dumb descriptor, even in IDM. I think it's a really dumb genre name, but I think it does sort of imply the idea here. Just like intelligent dance music is dancey music, but with some progressive values in it, which never really lose the dance element, but does do things just a hair bit differently and more experimental. That's sort of what I feel here. It's not quite progressive enough to call it prog, but it's certainly far beyond death metal. There needs to be something in the middle there that still carries a lot of the pure death elements, but plays around with things just a hair bit more. I don't know, maybe IDM, the metal variant, will take off one day. What I mean by all this, though, Bryan, you say it does things a little different, but it's the same. It's just like, okay, I do need to explain myself. This is heavy, abrasive, in your face, lots of noise, wall of sounds, lots of stuff coming at you all the time. Many sections frequently have fast drumming, fast guitar playing, the vocals are low and bellowing, and the songs, at least the two that we've heard so far, they don't let up. There isn't really a moment where they pull back. Well, I take that back. Track 2 here does have our like 30-second ambient bass solo, which I mean, that was really nice. It does feel like quite an anomaly against everything else. And actually, the more I think about this, yeah, I probably would put it in tech death. It does kind of belong there, doesn't it? Because it has this death foundation, all the noise, all the sound. But it's very playful metrically. It doesn't quite go in the direction that I feel tech death typically goes, which is high musicianship levels, especially in the guitar work. We think of First Fragment, we think of Archspire. These bands, I listen to them and I'm like, I'll never be able to play any of this in a million years. I don't get the same feelings here, and it might just be that they disguise it very well. It might sound a lot easier than it is, whereas bands like First Fragment tend to put a spotlight on the difficulty of the pieces themselves, how hard it would be to perform them. Maybe that's something I'll listen to going forward, is really key into what the guitars are doing, primarily during the faster parts. And try to perceive the difficulty level of them. But what I remember primarily from the guitars in both of these tracks is atmosphere. There are some quicker sections, but it's never really you have to be a guitar god to perform this. They just happen to be playing faster with their right hand, their picking hand, their strumming hand. The left hand seems to be a bit easier going, sometimes just playing one note or bouncing back and forth between two notes. It's very textural. You really get the bite of the guitar and oftentimes the aggressiveness of the quick attacks. But it really feels like more of a an exercise, if anything, of difficulty, of endurance, of the strumming hand. But again, I'll listen to that more as we go forward and refine my thoughts on that in particular. The bass work is really well done. usually lining up with the guitars and or the bass kick to create this width and power, but there was that moment where the bass got to shine a little bit and show off some of their melodic skills. It's one of the few moments in either of these tracks where melody was present at all. There are a couple of catchy riffs, but for the most part, the riffs are heavy, grueling, aggressive. They're not really melodic, not really going for flow and storytelling of a sequence of notes. It's about how does this feel? What's the texture of it? What is the weight of it? Heavy and punchy is the name of the game here, not fluid and melodic. Well, that's mostly the case. I mean, the vocals fall in line with that too. We don't have clean vocals in here. In fact, the vocals are low and growly, although they are clear and distinct. I like the production on the vocals. I made out a couple of words. We'll get into that later, but just being able to hear syllables is a big win for me. But there is a melodic element to the songs, and I'm kind of curious if anyone else picked up on this. The drumming is gorgeous. And this is going to segue into the next section real well, but let's start with just the drums. There are very few sections in here where I feel the drum is relegated to a metronome. The drums are consistently changing up what they're doing, how they're doing it, what kind of ideas they're doing the doing of. It is phenomenal to listen to, especially because it feels like every bar is changing the metric feeling of the song. Frequently, the drums will provide a bit of a backbeat for, I don't know, 2-4 beats, not very long at all, half of a bar to a bar, before going into a fill that leads into a completely different idea that incorporates a ton of ornamental work. And when you combine all of these micro shifts, metronome for a bar, a fill, ornamentation, a fill back to the metronome, it isn't just the consistency of presenting a metronomic time, it's utilizing a consistent beat and accent pattern as a spice within a larger idea that incorporates basically mini solos. Is that, we can look at a drum fill like that, but melodic drumming in general, also paired with elements of ornamentation. When you look at the entire phrase as a whole, it's a melody. It is a drum pattern, and it does get looped in the larger scope of this. The 4 ideas, when we get to the end, go back to the beginning. But that gives it a very linear feeling throughout. And so the drums to me oftentimes feel like the lead melody line. Everything else is texture, atmosphere, foundation, occasionally a chord thing. I don't really think there's chord progressions in here, but it's like it's slightly hinting towards a key that we're in. And then the drums are the thing that seem to actually be changing on top of it. And when you listen to the production as well, the drums are very forward. I wouldn't say that they're normally in the place that a lead guitar or vocalist would be in, but they definitely feel more present and closer to me than typical for metal production. It's almost as if the engineer knew or saw this phenomenon happening as well, where the band was foundation and the drums had a lead element to them. And the fact that the lead itself is still a loop on its own is not unusual. If you take the lyrics out of most pop songs and you just record the notes, you'll find very short patterns there as well. Loops in lead melodies is not new. Many of the times when I really found some enjoyment in this track, it was primarily from what the drums were contributing to the group, and I think it was just exceptionally refreshing to hear the drums be the lead. There are instruments in here that certainly can take the spotlight. The guitar riffs, They're crunchy, they're gritty, and they're mostly simple. I think for the most part they can be catchy, especially if you like these non-melodic types of riffs that you would find in death metal. The vocals have the voice part to them. It's what a lot of people latch on to. I know metal's a little different where a lot of metalheads don't care about vocal work, but for the most part, general music listeners have a tendency to latch on to the voice as it's the human element of the music. It's what's easiest to attach to since we all talk and use our voices every day as well. And I think some people might listen to this and hear the vocals as the lead. But yeah, at the end of the day, man, it's the drums for me. Now, I mentioned that the drums are constantly doing something new, and this lends itself well to a dynamic quality in the music, primarily of the metric side. The song never really feels like it wants to sit still in any capacity. The consistency of moving between a straight rhythmic pattern, which would be equidistant notes or weight, between similar length notes. This is going to be opposite of swing feel. So a straight rhythm would be bop, 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 bop. Everything is equidistant. Swing, you add a little bit of extra weight. Bop, ba, da, ba, da, ba, da, ba, da. It's written the exact same way. It's just a series of eighth notes. We don't use dotted notation or 16th note flags in order to showcase the extra weight. It is simply stated at the top of the sheet music, swing feel. And so when you see a series of eighth notes, you have to swing them rather than play them straight. Well, another feeling that we can have opposed to straight is triplet feel. Instead of bop, 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 which is 2 per, triplet would be 3 per. Bop, 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 bop. We have a lot of triplet feel in here. But it's never really stuck around for very long. I mentioned the drums like to move between ideas quickly. So we'll do quarter notes. We'll do triplet feel. We will go to eighth notes, 2 per beat. And all of this is also played around with how often hits come. So sometimes we will get a hit every beat, sometimes every other beat, sometimes twice a beat. And so the song constantly feels like it's stretching between a midpoint, a double time, and a half time in order to make the song feel quite alive. It almost feels conversational, and that sometimes when you speak it, you speed up a little bit, sometimes you speak at a more normal rate, and sometimes for emphasis, you might slow down a little bit. Really allow some words to carry some weight. And the song feels like that. The tempo and time signature are rather consistent. The phrasing is also rather consistent. But the feeling of the song is constantly in flux. It makes it feel quite organic. And this is for both of the songs entirely. It's not something that was only present in one. And most of this comes from, at least I feel, the drums. Now, granted, everybody plays along with this. When the drums go half time, the guitars also strum half as much. And when the drums go into double time, the guitars pick up 16th note picking. But it really feels like the drummer is the leader here, and they're not following a guitar riff. You notice how I haven't phrased this as the guitar riff is constantly changing. I view this entirely as the drums consistently changing up the time feel and the rest of the band going along with it. To me, they are the band leader. It also helps that I see them as the melody, the lead part of the song, and so everybody follows the lead. Now, the last thing I want to touch on before we hit some lyrics for these two tracks is, well, another really good segue. I just mentioned that the song is rather consistent in its tempo, time signature, and phrasing. It really is just the feeling of the song that changes up most of the time. Well, let me say that again. Most of the time. You see, there is some really fun metric compositional stuff going on here as well. The song starts out in a 3 pulse. It's rather fast. I want to read that as 3/8, but 3/8 is kind of a weird time signature. It's certainly doable, it's just uncommon. So I'd probably say it is a high tempo 3/4, probably looking at something around, if I remember correctly, 150, 160, 170 beats per minute, maybe 200. That feels a bit fast. Probably not. I should get, yeah. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get my little tempo doodad out. And the next couple of tracks, I'm going to check some tempo speeds and see what we're playing at. All right, that's ready to go for next time. That's always so. Part of this app is not just a metronome, but it's also not. Yeah, it's a tuner. And so I pull it up and it tries to tell me what notes I'm saying, but I'm just speaking, and it gets really funny to watch and kind of realize that most of my speech sits around a third octave. I don't think I knew that. Uh, yeah, I have that ready to go. What else? Oh, yeah, metric stuff. Okay, yeah. So we start out in the 3/4. Not too long after that, we move to a 4/4. A bit later, we move to a 4/4, but a 5-bar phrase, which there's two ways to go about writing this. Anybody who wants to be a composer or even an arranger or a transposer. These are all aspects that require knowing how to write sheet music. 5 bars are 4/4. 5 times 4 is 20 beats. If you have 4 beats per bar, you have 5 bars, pretty typical. We can reverse this though and put it into a 4-bar phrase, which is more typical, and that would give us 5 beats per bar, which would give us the 5/4 time signature. It's possible that this is what they did, but musically we were working with 4-beat phrases. So if we did do this, the phrases would cross over the bar. It would be a bit less legible to read, although it would give us a proper symmetrical phrasing to it. Either way works, they both get the idea across, but I think changing up the phrasing is how I would probably write it, since that's how it feels in the music. You're listening to it, you're like, all right, we're in 4/4. We get to the end of the 4th bar, and you're ready to reset the phrase entirely. You're ready to get back to the beginning of this riff, and it doesn't. It keeps descending further than you were expecting. It feels like there's more at play than you wanted, than you thought was going to happen. That's where the extra bar comes in. It's really interesting to see all of this happen so fluidly and without any notion. There's nothing that leads into any of this, which I guess kind of it ties into another thing that I wasn't planning on talking about, but I probably should. These songs don't care about me as a listener in the slightest. Every single one of these tracks, every moment of them, is a brutal onslaught of noise and sound, consistently moving and stretching and squashing and changing and manipulating in ways that you really have to familiarize yourself with the track in order to be able to guess where any of it is going. It is leaving very little clues, and if there are clues, given the speed of these tracks, there's no time to pick them up about where it's going. You just have to be along for the ride. And if you're not ready for this, the song does not care. It doesn't prepare you for any of the changes. It doesn't set you up for any of the whiplash alterations. Sometimes we just grind the song to a halt for a single quick beat and then pick up on something else new entirely, as if they think that half of a second of silence is enough of a palate cleanser. And wouldn't you know, they're right. It's enough for my brain to be like, oh, wait, we're back into it. And just that little question of, wait, that was weird, is enough for me to accept where we're going now. It's a roller coaster ride in sonic form. And I think that's what makes it so fun. I don't know that I would listen to this outside of this situation here, but as far as heavy, aggressive, difficult to listen to, brutal music goes, I'm enjoying myself to some capacity. 30 minutes sounds about right for this. I think I might, if they continue on with this ferocity, I might find myself becoming a bit fatigued around the 20-minute mark, but fortunately there isn't much music to come after that. If I need a break, of course, I will take one. I am known to do that mid-album for heavy songs or heavy bands like this. I'm not thinking I'm going to have to this time around though. We'll see. But I think pushing through an extra 8 minutes of music isn't going to be that bad because there's enjoyable aspects to this. It is heart pumping. It is adrenaline rushing. But it's fun and controlled, and it's put a smile on my face more than most death metal ever has. There's just so many really clever ideas and the constant metamorphosis of the track, primarily in the way that it feels all controlled by the drum, the masterful control of time and flow. It gives me something to enjoy past the sheer brutality of the sonic assault. Yeah, that's a good way to end that. It is definitely an aggressive album, but that's not all it is. And while some bands might be more than that, once you dig past the surface, this band puts the fun at the top with the aggression, and I can appreciate that a lot. Let's check out some lyrics. Heavy, dark topics on both of these, though the first one I think is a little less heavy, more of just cosmic terror. It speaks of a giant lumbering behemoth. They call it the King Megalith. It's a lumbering fortress of pain. It is organic, though. Skeletal beams, veins of steel, bleeding streaks of rust, withered and weathered. Actually, reading this a third time, reading things out loud, like I said the other day, something about reading them out loud. It helps. I think it's just making allusions to organic matter and that this is not an organic construct. Maybe. Anyways, it's just a gigantic thing. It does command, though. It is the Brutalist Imperator, a building most likely of brutalistic design visually, and an Imperator is one who commands. It calls it itself the Mega Cosmic Tomb. Being a lumbering fortress of pain, I assume that it brings death to everywhere it goes. And it's old, withered and weathered. That's it. That's all the lyrics. These are rather short songs lyrically, which the songs themselves are already short on a time length, but there's just not a lot of words inside the songs either. Baptismal Tomb. It appears to be a song about waking up in a flooding cave. Well, a tomb. It says awoken, gasping, lungs flooding, a forced, breathless baptism. It talks about how they're confined in here. It's torture, that resistance doesn't yield anything, it's futile. It calls itself total immersion, total admission with no liberation, endless annihilation. You can fight all you want, but the tomb is filling up. You're going to run out of air, and you're going to die down here. That's That's what the song is about. I'm pretty sure that kind of sets the stage for the rest of this album. There's only 5 more songs with lyrics, though, according to Metal Archives. Tracks 4 and 8 are instrumentals. So, fingers crossed, if they continue to be as dark and heavy as they are, hopefully the lack of lyrics and only having a few more songs that actually have lyrics will at least ease the pain of reading through them and discussing them just a little bit. All right, let's get back into this, diving into track 3, Throe of Illicit Withdrawal. Yeah, this song is about 195 BPMs. Another one of those odd stretchings out of moments. If we follow just the symbol, we're about 130. So we do have quite a few tempo shifts in here that aren't exactly doubling or halving the feeling of the song. A lot of dissonance in that track. Have I just been missing that in the other ones, or is that one specifically there to create the tension? We're going to check out this instrumental here. I have a small feeling it's going to go into the next track, though. It feels like this is going to move into the next track, but we have to. I can't. I can't wait. I need to talk about that. Yeah, we're going to pause there. There's still like 10 seconds left. So we'll have a little bit of that lead in. We'll get back into the mindset a little bit before moving into track 5. I had begun this entire video by saying that it wasn't quite progressive enough for me to label it prog. It felt weird attaching that word there. And the more I think about it, prog and progressive are not the same to me. Progressive is a descriptor, prog is a genre. Prog has a very specific sound to it, even though technically it's just a shortened version of progressive, which should mean anything that just does something new, but that's not my relationship to the words. Prog rock is not progressive rock, it's a very specific sound. And so there's some experimentation in here for sure, but it feels very safe compared to what I think of when I think of prog metal. Up until here, this is experimental on a sonic scale. Not only are they playing around with what can I make a guitar do? It sounds like there's a lot of effects on it. It sounds like they're playing with pedals as they do it. There's a pitch shifter in here, it sounds like. Probably a foot pedal with an analog movement to it. You can adjust the way that it sounds. There's also maybe some stuff going on the engineering side that isn't controlled by the guitarists themselves. But little tweaks and automations done to effects in post. It certainly sets a mood. An ambient guitar whose tone never really dies. There's always this low hum of the last note sitting at the bottom, even if the core timbre itself has faded and petered out. It creates the feeling, to me at least, of making an effort and any consequences or actions of that effort are erased, become null and void. They evaporate. You can't see any progression in the work that you're doing. There is a defeatist element to this that I think lines up. It's probably the mental state I'm in thanks to the lyrics. Everything is very things suck and there's nothing you can do about it. That's the vibe I've got from the lyrics so far. Throe of Illicit Withdrawal doesn't necessarily tell me a story in that title alone of something that's going to be a bit more optimistic. So, I think we might be on to something there. But it does feel very much like any effort is wasted. That's exactly the atmosphere the song tells me. It's dreary, it's lonely, and any sound the guitar makes is washed away into the ether. But all of that is accomplished through this sonic experimentation. And I think that's very cool. It's not what I would expect. Everything up to this point, sonically, the tones of the guitars, the tones of the drums and the production put on them, the style of vocal delivery, everything is very death metal. It's very safe and expected. Sonic experimentation, moody atmosphere, these are not things I expect from a death metal band, especially one as brutal. This is more atmospheric and feels more at home in Post and Blackened than Death. It shows a little bit of extra depth to this group. Having listened to just over 10 minutes worth of, well, almost 11 minutes worth of aggressive, in your face, we will stop for nothing sonic onslaught death metal. it's really interesting to hear them take a step back and do something so patient, so moody and atmospheric. Completely unexpected. Came out of left field, but I think that's why it works. I wonder what it means, though. Tooms. I mean, it's kind of like Tooms, but the semi-silent B from tomb is sort of not present. It's sort of more of a functional spelling of tombs. I don't know. There were a couple of things I wanted to look at regarding track 3, though. Throe of Illicit, Withdrawal. First of all is the dissonance. There's tons of it in it. I recall some dissonant moments in tracks 1 and 2, but they never really stood out to me as the de facto mode. And maybe that's because I was focusing so heavily on the drums. That's possible as well. But they were heavy and abrasive in ways outside of the harmonic element. Track 3 seems to exist primarily within tension and dissonance. The guitars are constantly playing harmonically against each other. It makes the song feel a little less interesting to my ear. Well, no, that's not the right word. Less palatable. I definitely enjoyed the first two tracks more than this one, and I think part of that isn't necessarily just the fact that I picked up on the dissonance, but that it takes so much more space of the song than the other two tracks. I mentioned how the drum sort of takes the spotlight for track 1 and 2, and this could entirely be that I was listening more for the guitar work in this track, specifically to see what was going on with it, but the drums also felt like they were in less of the spotlight entirely, and I think a lot of this comes down to more of the rigidity of this track, which not only plays a bit lighter with its tempo, it definitely has some fast parts in the beginning, but we go for a more spacious playing in the back half of the track, which gives more space and room for the guitars to be present and for that dissonance to be heard and felt. I found this track to be less playful, which, having read the lyrics and looking at all of the song titles here, playful is probably not the direction Nightmare wanted their songs to be read as. I can just imagine the bands watching this video and they're like, he said our songs were fun. What do we have to do to make him feel the anger and despair? This guy's inhuman. Um, but no, track 3 definitely felt less fun to me. The roller coaster had tricked me, and where the fun loop de loops and corkscrews are now replaced with like 3 minute long death drops, something totally impossible in real space. But like a nightmare where you just can't get off the ride, and the elements of it become more hellish as you go forward. That's where track 3 took me. The roller coaster was no longer fun, and I wanted off the ride, and they didn't let me. But they let me stop in Tooms, so I guess that was kind of nice. All of that tension was not really released. Still a rather tense song, but delivered in a different dose. One more atmospheric. All right, that wraps up my thoughts on this duo of songs. I'm kind of curious where track 5 is going to take us since it's the longest by far. We didn't even get out of the 3 minute range in our first 4 tracks, and this one is over 5. It is the longest track on the album, although track 9 is only 1 second shorter. But what are they going to do with all that space? The ferocity and intensity, if that's the decision they take, I think could be exhausting in 5 minute length. And there's definitely going to need to be a moment, I think, to deviate from that. Although they did showcase in track 2 that they know how to get away from that. And if we have more bass solo in here to help with the palatability. I have no complaints about that. In fact, any element of melody I would take. Doesn't even need to be the bass, though. I love the bass. Give me a guitar solo. Give me some clean vocals. I don't expect either of those. I'm just going to be straight up honest. I don't expect that to happen. But, you know, you got a violin off to the side you can play a melody on? Go for it, man. I'll take anything. 5 minutes of abrasive aggressiveness is going to be a bit much. Let's hit some lyrics. I'm curious if there's supposed to be a second layer to any of this. I'm reading it all very surface level here, which I tend to do. I try to check myself on that sometimes. And this song made me think about that because it very well could be a metaphor for a lot of things. Basically, any type of addiction. But it says, all chaos reigns, tumultuous temper, torturous routine, the spirit mangled and ground into madness, euphoria in the absence of awareness, enslaved by existence. It's about the routine of breaking someone down. Not just once, but constantly breaking them down into nothing, left in the dirt, a spirit mangled. We see this cycle actually put into the song lyrically. Further into the track, it says, pummeled, stopped, stomped, barred from escape, violently broken, dragged back into the tumultuous temper, the torturous routine, the spirit is mangled. No matter what, by the end of this person, or maybe even these people, this concept as a whole is a cycle. And it always drags people back into the torturous routine of breaking down their spirit. Like I said, this could be a metaphor for some stuff, but it's written in a way that could just fit into the idea of constant suffering, a very physical suffering that lines up with the suffering we have seen in the tracks 1 and 2 as far as their lyrics go. It's quite possible there is a secondary metaphorical layer to everything on this track, but thematically, there's a lot of cohesion on the surface level of all these that at least there's a part of me that thinks maybe there's not a secondary layer because the cohesion there indicates the primary layer is how this is all connected. All right. Let's keep this rolling. The next track's called Suffering Beyond Death. I don't think we have too much positive to look forward to there. Let's listen to the last 10 seconds of Tooms, and then it'll move into track 5. Just really going for a slow weight here. The bass kicks are a great way to keep this driving forward, while everything else is this lumbering weights. tom roll becoming the bass kicks for this section was really good. I think this is one of the least dynamic sections we've had in the whole album. Just really taking their time at this slower tempo. The tom roll into the bass kicks gets me every time. It's just so masterful. Okay, I got it now. The dotted notes on the guitar were kind of throwing me off a little. But I see how they fit now. And we're going to keep this rolling. I mean, primarily that song I thought was so long because it had a lot of patience in it. They basically stretched out a few sections that in other tracks would have been compressed down. That was a little... Yeah, this is a very different vocal delivery. There's some of his natural voice layered in there. Even rhythmically, texturally, riffage, this is more static than anything else we've seen. There's some clipping in here too. I don't know what it comes from. Really nice contrast there. Oh, I like the choir. Such a punk thing to do. Just an absolutely massive sounds. So here's something. I mentioned track 5. Kind of takes its time. It's the longest track on the album, but honestly, I don't think it explores any more than any other track does. It just feels it can sit within a few of the sections a bit longer. We had that section in the middle that I said felt less dynamic than anything else on the track. And then we had our outro section that we sat on for at least a minute's worth of the song. As a whole, that track just had less of a problem staying somewhere. It didn't feel like it constantly needed to move on, which was how I described the opening 2 tracks there. Their constant metamorphosis of the music, the drummer never wanting to sit still, always changing ideas up. Here, tracks 5 and 6, the drums have no problem sitting in a pocket for a little more. The length of staying within an idea, not jumping between a bunch of stuff. The drums have slowly shifted out of the spotlight for me. They're still impressive, and I love when they do really neat ideas and transitions, foreshadowings, all sorts of stuff that the drummer still takes as a lead instrument. But just not quite as frequent or consecutive as we saw at the beginning of the album. Everything is kind of slowing down. With this last track we checked out, track 6, Taufbefehl, which stands out on its own. Every other song is in English, assuming that Tooms is English, but it might not be. Except Taufbefehl. Kind of makes me want to see what that's about. I also heard some German possibly in here. In the middle of the track, some spoken word stuff. This song certainly stands out quite a bit. It has different vocals, at least at the beginning. We get rid of the low guttural growls and bring in a higher compressed clean. There's even moments where it feels like there's pure clean for just a single syllable before putting the compression on top of it. Musically, it's really confident about just playing one note over and over and over and allowing the weight and implication of the size and monotony of this one sound to justify the simplicity of the music. I think it does that very well, even on the drumming side, as far as complexity of drum patterns. There are a few sections in here as far as transitions go, but the general idea that the drummer sits within for each section is a bit on the simpler side. And a lot of it stems, well, not a lot of it, a couple of sections feel like they stem more from punk than metal. It's an interesting track that seems to take inspiration more from doom and post-metal than the death metal that the album starts on. And this started me thinking about something. The old gears in the brain turning. If our first two tracks are technical death metal and our third track is more in line of death metal, track 4, our instrumental, is ambient metal. Track 5 shifts more towards a death doom sound, and track 6 is a doom post sound. We have this de-escalation of compositional intensity. All of the flourish and extraness and transitions, constant evolution at the beginning of the track has slowly been weeded out to find the core sound, which of course fits through all of this. This entire album is about heaviness and weight. It's just it was dressed up a little bit at the beginning. It's still a heavy, aggressive album. I had the old stank face thrown out in the first track. It's not like I've changed that. It's come out almost every track. This is just a gnarly, aggressive album. But we got rid of all the fanciness around it as the album has gone on. And with track 6 here, it's just the weight of it all. No masks, no jewelry, nothing to dress it up or divert your attention from what's actually going on. The weight and despair of the music. And I find this interesting, the stripping of the layers to find the core of it all. I don't know why I didn't do this earlier, but Spotify has this little thing I see out of the corner of my eye called About the Artist. Usually I click on this rather early, or once I hit a point where I'm a bit stumped and I remember it's there. This is sort of one of those moments, even in the excerpt, and I'm surprised again that I didn't see this earlier. Former members of Geigen, WFAHM, I don't know who that is, and The Ocean. Yeah, some of the post-metal stuff and doom and atmospheric writing in general are beginning to make a lot of sense. In fact, now I find it more impressive not that the tech death band can write slower and more patiently, but the patient and slow band can actually do really well tech death. It says this international collective set out to derive only the most extreme elements of their previous musical endeavors and take them to a much more miserable and punishing level. Yes, I think this album captures that perfectly. I'm not sure of the bands Geigen and WFHAM. My guess is they're going to be a bit more on the techie death side of things. But seeing this album get stripped down to just the post metal side, which has always sort of been there if you wanted to pay attention, but was disguised, at least for me. Sure, I called the opening songs aggressive and weighty, but I would never have called them atmospheric or heavy. Not in this sense, anyways. But retroactively thinking back to the beginning of the album that I listened to about an hour and a half ago, yeah, it's always been there. I find this fascinating. With 2 songs left to go, plus a 40-second instrumental to take us into our final track, I'm curious which direction they're going to take this. Do we bring it full circle, or do we continue to strip things down to the barest? Either way, I think we're in for some ridiculously bleak music. Let's hit some lyrics. Suffering beyond death is it's what it is. The core repeated line throughout this is dead and still suffering. It's still being conscious of your body past death and still being able to at least see, maybe not well, no, there's agony. You can feel everything that happens to your body post death. It says bones exposed by cracking skin, phantom lacerations, unreasonable agony, carrion birds tear at long dead flesh, a crushing realization of endless wander. That's that's it. It's very straightforward. Now, Taufbefehl translates to baptism command. This track lyrically makes a little less sense to me. It's also the heaviest, most atmospheric song. I don't get it. There is German in it, but the entire song is not German. It bounces back and forth between German and English. I'm not sure if there's a purpose to delineating which one gets to do what lines. But there is this idea of breaking down a human by drowning them in the blood of God. An idea of endless new beginnings brought about through endless decay. At one point it says newborn replica, complete the process, open the wound, submerge into liquid metal. An attack on innocence for the continuation of my power, creature of terror, motherless animal full of regret. Much like many of the other songs, there is only a handful of stanzas here, and much of it is either repurposed, recontextualized, or straight up repeated later in the track. I don't get this one though. and the short sentences that I think typically are utilized to cover less dense topics, as we see in other tracks, only seems to obscure what this track is supposed to be about. I could really use a little bit more detail in the lyrics for this track, which isn't a criticism I've had for the other songs. Alright, I suppose quite a bit earlier than my expectation, let's wrap this up. We have Hammer of Desolation next, just shy of 4 minutes. Endstadium as a 40-second interlude into our final track, Obliterated Shrine. Give or take about 10 minutes left, we'll probably run it all together. Let's dive in. The drums really filling out the sound here, while the guitars go for more anemic dissonance and texture. The bass guitar is helping out the drums in this section. Really interesting recontextualization. The guitars still have the long drawn out ends, but the drums push forward through them. They don't feel as weightless as they did the first time around. They are really stretching this one guitar riff. This is one riff for the whole song, isn't it? We have a small variation here, but it's still generally the same idea. Yeah, interesting. As dynamic as the album's been, even with the last couple of tracks being a bit less dynamic, we haven't had a single riff dominate a song like that. It'd be interesting to get into the lyrics on it. See if there is an element of stagnation or uniformity. Oh, this is different. So we're in a 9/4, very cool. Maybe we weren't in a 9. It might have been alternating 9/7, which is just 2 sets of 8 with one having an extra, one having a lesser. Which could be written 4/4. That's exactly what it is. It's 4/4, but in groupings of 9 and 7. So the 16 beat phrase feels like it's divided up oddly. Some straight up deathcore vocals here. It's even lower than usual. I think this is the most straightforwardly brutal section of the album, too. a ton of clipping going on here as well. Come on, Spotify. So these two songs I found were the most monotonous. Track 7 is one. Actually, both of these songs are filled with just one idea, minor variation put on it, but at least very clearly the one idea. It's a massive step away from our first two tracks, which were constantly jumping around new ideas. It makes me wonder if I go back to Brutalist, Imperator, and Baptismal Tomb, if I listen intently for the focus of motifs or even something on the bottom of the song that is a consistent rhythmic idea or consistent riff throughout, if I would find that. Once again, it feels like the song slowly strips back the palatable layers and slowly showcases its true form of rigid, uniform, oppressive metal. It is too perfect, I think, not to have been an intentional element of this album. The heavy, aggressive weight is there in every track, but it's done with little fancy elements at the beginning that, at least for me, kept my attention away from the darkness, from the heaviness of it all, and gave me little shimmery things uh, to keep my interest, like a little child with keys in front of my eyes, so that I don't realize how existentially devastated I am. But as the album goes on, these little ornamental ideas, they get stripped back. The uh, fancier structure and composition gets slowly removed until in our last few tracks it's just the weight, just the heaviness, a single monolithic riff per song that dominates everything. And of course, with track 9 here, we not only go towards a single heavy dissonant riff, we strip down the drums to be rather utilitarian, and we even somehow increase the, or I guess decrease the pitch of our growl, the perceived tone of it, to make it heavier and darker than ever. I don't think I've heard an album like this, and I think any of these songs in isolation would probably not showcase the true width of the band. Even if you would give me Brutalist Imperator as a single track to listen to, I would really only see their more eclectic, progressive, intelligent side of writing. If you gave me Obliterated Shrine, I would get to see how heavy they can get, but neither one of them really captures the album. It is an experience, a descent, if you will, down to the harshest throes of madness. It's impressive from that angle, but my enjoyment of the album was subsequently stripped each song as well, with my favorite probably being the first track and my least favorite being the last, at least from a sonic enjoyment level. From an artistic level, I don't think any of them really didn't work for me. Tooms is probably The one I found least engaging, but I think that's also the point of it. Endstadium, I don't really see as a track on itself. It is an intro for Obliterated Shrine. It is just a drone. And it's a drone that Obliterated Shrine even starts with. We still have 5 to 10 seconds left at the beginning of that track of the drone. Endstadium feels an odd choice to separate out. But Tooms is certainly, while also being an intro to Suffering Beyond Death, it is still a 2-minute song of itself, and it explores things that aren't explored in its subsequent track. So, it's also, though, the one I find least engaging, as it's just a guitar being strummed and having some effects put on it after each strum. It's more atmospheric than cerebral, and I found myself being a bit more bored with that than any of the others. Though it was an interesting foreshadowing. I think that was really the point where the atmospheric writing began to show its face. And it was highly emblematic of what we would see in tracks 7 and 9 to wrap the album up. So, an important track, even if I think in isolation it is the weakest. It's certainly one of those tracks that works best in the album because its purpose is entirely built around the album. But everything that I've talked about from the beginning, aside from the more technical elements, are still present. There is a heavy weight, a darkness, a dreariness, dissonance. I honestly think the dissonance increased over time, with Obliterated Shrine being our most dissonant track, and the reason that I didn't really recognize it too much in the opening tracks is partially probably because of the shiny keys of the drums distracting me, but also because I think it was probably utilized less. As the ornamental elements were stripped down, the dissonant elements were increased. In a way that feels like a trade-off, but is honestly more of just removing the mask and being able to hear more clearly what's beneath it. That metaphor got weird real quick. I think the only point that doesn't work with this linear movement is track 6's shift, both in language and in delivery, given that it has a very different vocal style than anything else. And I'm still kind of curious where all those decisions came from. At times, even the musical shifts to the punkier drum style, it feels divorced from the album in quite a few ways and almost feels like a cover, possibly. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but it is the most distinct track on the album and the one that I feel is least connected thematically, at least how I see all the tracks working together. Let's take a look at these most bleak lyrics, I'm going to assume, the worst ones on the album, and then we'll wrap up this video. Track 7, Hammer of Desolation, is exactly what it sounds like. It is a giant hammer that, as it comes down through the sky, the clouds part, it hits the ground, shock waves are sent out, splitting the ground and destroying all around. It says, whirling chaos, fog of wraiths, a looming over doom cloaks the instrument of death. The bludgeon of emptiness supersedes the heavy air, splits the pale sky. The hammer drops, deals shock waves of hell, unparalleled devastation and desolation. That's every single line, and I think it speaks for itself. Something I haven't really touched on yet is the language, the diction, the vocabulary chosen. When I described it before reading the lyrics, that was a bit more plain and casual speech that I said it in, and while it gets the point across, I don't think it necessarily details how apocalyptic it is. I like the language choice utilized here. It's flourishy, it's a bit flowery. It expands on things, but it doesn't go overboard into the black metal, old English doing it, way overboard to the point of needing a thesaurus to break down what's being said to me. It finds a nice middle ground where it's descriptive and concise without being difficult to read. And that goes for pretty much all of the lyrics. Given the conciseness, the little amount of lyrics present on the album as a whole, and the reutilization of lyrics, repeating stanzas, multiple stanzas in each song, having an efficient language is exceptionally important. And the lyricist did a fantastic job of finding the right words in order to say so much and speak so much of the devastation, to describe everything in as much detail as possible while utilizing the least amount of syllables. It's just a very efficient linguistic style. While a lot of the words carry a weight too. I think that they all feel very metal. What I guess I'm coming around to saying is that the lyrics are perfect. Even if I'm not a big fan of the topics being spoken about, this is certainly not lyrics I'm going to want to dive into again in the future. They perfectly fit the song while being exceptionally efficiently written. Obliterated Shrine calls back to our very first track, Brutalist Imperator, which spoke about this looming giant monolithic monument that brought pain. It was paralleled or maybe even spoken about having organic elements to it. It was described as a prehistoric monument and a king megalith. Much of that same imagery comes about here. It says monolith of corrosion, obliterated shrine, misery industrialized. Once again, speaking about the steel beams, the rust of it all, and the fact that it was designed to create misery. Now, interestingly, unlike many of the other tracks, this one I feel has a metaphorical aspect to it. The industrial machine is a phrase that has been utilized to describe the way that work has gone since the industrial era. Um, and the way that this is described reminds me of the way that people are put to work in order to basically be a cog in a machine, the humanity of them forgotten, and misery is put in place as a key element of living, of existence. You put yourself through misery so you can get paid and live. And unfortunately, with the way things are now, we live sort of miserably, where wages aren't quite up to par with the cost of living. I don't necessarily know if this album is supposed to, in some way, be a societal critique of things. I might be injecting a bit more of myself into this final track than they are, or that I'm reading of, their authorial intent, because there really isn't anything else in this that I think has social criticism packed into it. There was one point, was it track 3? I think it was track 3. Throe of Illicit Withdrawal, which I had mentioned could be taken into a metaphorical route for addiction. It's possible many of these are supposed to be read that way, but most of the songs I still only have a surface read, and just the general idea of misery uh, brought onto us by these eldritch or uh, godlike horrors. It feels like sci-fi misery written for the sake of misery, and I don't necessarily feel like much of this is supposed to be read past that. But the fact that I can read past it in 2 tracks opens up a little bit of curiosity about the others. Makes me wonder if there is a little bit more here than I picked up on. So anyways, we have this mechanical machine that people get chained to it, and it just creates misery. There's one point spoken in quotation, so somebody is saying this, says, "Overseer, unleash the storm of blades, commit mass misery. Punishment is productivity, misery is fertility." That's a bit on the nose as far as the metaphor goes. Punishment is productivity. That is just, yep, late stage capitalism right there. Everything after this is more of repeated of those same three stanzas we just checked out. The monotony, repetitiveness that the album veers towards and eventually lands on certainly feels like the day-to-day grind of work that is unfulfilling, that is designed to be productive for something else and misery for us. At one point, it even says, "You can rust from the inside out or accept the blade. You can choose death or you can choose misery. Which one are you going to do?" The parallels, I think, grow the more that I look on these lyrics, and it becomes to a point where I feel like it is an intentful metaphor for it all. But it only makes me question the other lyrics more. What did I miss in the other 5 songs worth of lyrics that might have had more of a metaphorical read of how life can be miserable and what kind of forces force misery on us in the day to day where it doesn't need to be? But I suppose this is where I extend the question out to y'all. Anyone who wants to look at the lyrics, metal-archives.com has them. I didn't find them on Genius. It's possible they're elsewhere, but these seem to be rather accurate. Spotify also has the lyrics if you have a Spotify account. They're not synced up to the music, which... Oh, man, I forgot about that. The vocals became more and more unintelligible, or I suppose less intelligible as the album went on too. I praised how I could hear syllables in our first track, and as the album went on, I found I could do that less and less. They became more alien to me, more muffled and disgruntled and lower, less human. Hmm. Anyways, the lyrics are there if you want to read through them and see if maybe you find an extra layer that I missed. Let me know. Regardless, these are my thoughts on Nightmare's Deformity Adrift. It's an album. Not one I'd like to return to, but I think one that I might include in my AOTY list. It really depends on if this second layer of interpretation comes through. If so, it definitely goes into my heavy art category. If not, and it's just an album of misery because the people wanted to write a miserable album, well, it certainly achieves that goal, but I appreciate it a lot less than. It's not my cup of tea. As usual, also, down in the comments section, post any of your thoughts, opinions, perspectives, if you agree with me, if there's things I missed, just things you want to add on to what I said. I have a good jumping off point, and you've got some stuff you want to add to it. Go for it. Comment section is open for whatever you want to write. Mostly, I do moderate it. You can't put anything you want down there, but it is open. Above that, in the description box, is a link for Linktree. It takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all 3 of those. That wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow morning / afternoon, maybe evening for some of y'all. If I was gonna say morning and afternoon. I was like, actually, some people do watch the live stream at dinner time. So I guess I got to include evening also. And then I'm like, well, Brian, you just said all of it. I'll see y'all tomorrow is how that should have went. 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. UTC. We'll do a 2-hour live stream. All the songs are pre-picked, but y'all can drop by, chat. It's a really great community. We have some nice in jokes. There's always some funny stuff that goes on. Most of the titles for the streams make no sense unless you participate in the chat or watch what people are saying and experience the chat in the VOD after I upload it for everyone to watch. So it's a good time. You know, real chill, real relaxed. Just listen to 10 songs. Actually, I think tomorrow we have 11 songs. Um, just casually enjoy them. All right, until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.